They had power, money, and armies, yet they still lost $50 billion to a young African soldier named Traoré. But how did a man with no suit, no bank account, outsmart the most powerful CEOs in the West? And what if I told you this wasn't just about money, but about centuries of injustice finally striking back? The chandeliers sparkled like constellations above the marble lobby of the Horizon Continental Hotel, the crown jewel of Ouagadougou's elite. Every corner of the room reeked of power, the scent of expensive cigars, imported whiskey, and polished leather shoes. Waiters glided across the floor like shadows balancing silver trays of caviar and French champagne. Conversations crackled in English, French, and clipped German. No local language dared interrupt this symphony of wealth. In the center of it all, beneath a velvet banner that read Burkina Mining Global Partnership, a semicircle of men clinked glasses. Western CEOs in sharp navy suits with golden pins laughed as they toasted the signing of a $50 billion contract to extract rare minerals buried deep in the soil of Burkina Faso. Lurking behind them were local ministers and diplomats smiling nervously as if unsure whether to celebrate or apologize. One man, a German executive with salt and pepper hair and a lion head cane, grinned as he turned to the cameras. "Gentlemen," he declared, "Africa is open for business, and we are the future of its prosperity." Applause, flashes, polite nods. Behind the curtain of smiles, though, the air was thick, not with celebration, but a strange kind of static, like the electric silence before a tropical storm. And then, the doors creaked open. She didn't belong. That much was immediately obvious. An elderly woman, her back hunched like a shepherd's staff, stepped into the marbled lobby. Her feet were bare. Her cotton dress, threadbare and faded, fluttered from the air conditioning. She clutched a yellow folder against her chest like it was made of gold. Silence fell, the kind of silence that slices a room in half. A security guard moved toward her, confused, but she didn't stop, didn't flinch. She walked past him slowly, purposefully, eyes fixed on the group of men in suits. "Who let her in?" a voice whispered. "Is this some kind of protest? Ridiculous?" The woman reached the velvet ropes that separated the VIPs from the rest of the world. She looked directly at the German CEO, the lion with the cane. "Monsieur," she said in French, her voice hoarse but unwavering, "you are stealing what is not yours." The room held its breath. Cameras stopped clicking. The CEO blinked, amused at first, then irritated. "Madam," he said coldly, "you don't belong here." "This is a private—" "I do belong here," she interrupted, "because my family has lived on that land for 6 generations. That contract signs away our water, our trees, our sky." One of the local ministers moved in awkwardly, whispering something into her ear. She shook her head, raised the yellow folder. "In here are burial records, land deeds, photographs. My husband died mining uranium for France. My son disappeared after protesting your trucks." The German CEO scoffed. "You think some dusty papers from a village can override the law?" Her eyes, sharp as broken glass, met his. "Your law is not justice." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. The cameras, sensing blood, flicked back on. "This is an outrage," another CEO barked. "Where is security? Remove her." But no one moved. Even the guards hesitated. Something about her presence, so small yet immovable, made people pause. She slowly laid the yellow folder down on a glass table next to the champagne. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back through the lobby. Her steps echoed louder than applause. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then came the comment that changed everything. "Who was that woman?" someone muttered. A diplomat leaned in. "Her name is Adisa. She's from the Kulpelago region. And rumor is she's not alone." The silence left by the old woman's departure still hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke. The yellow folder sat on the crystal table like a ticking bomb, untouched amid half-filled flutes of champagne. A murmur rippled across the room, CEOs whispering, ministers fidgeting, diplomats glancing nervously toward the entrance, waiting for security to restore the hierarchy they thought they controlled. But then the tension fractured, not with sirens, not with shouts, but with footsteps. Measured, steady, boots. And then they saw him. A tall man stepped calmly into the lobby, his stride neither rushed nor hesitant. He wore no tie, no presidential sash, no gold medal of office, just a plain olive jacket, military slacks, and a red beret. It was the beret that made the blood drain from certain faces in the room. That symbol had begun to mean something different over the last few months, something unpredictable. President Ibrahim Traoré. His name didn't need to be announced. The room recognized him the way a forest recognizes the sound of fire. He paused at the base of the staircase, gaze sweeping the room, not with anger, not even judgment, just presence. A calm power that didn't need to prove itself. When he spoke, it was not a shout, but it cut through the marble halls like a blade. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, his voice low, but resonant, "the woman who stood here before you holds more power than any of you ever will." The room froze. A few diplomats exchanged glances, half in disbelief, half in fear. The German CEO scoffed, breaking the silence. "This is outrageous. She's a villager, an activist." This is not how Traoré raised one finger. Not to silence him, but to give him one last second to think carefully. He continued, "She carried truth and the weight of the dead. You carry contracts written in deception, cloaked in suits, signed in smoke-filled rooms, far from the land you exploit." The CEOs began to stir. A British executive stepped forward. "Mr. President, we've invested billions into this agreement. Pulling out now would send shockwaves through who?" Traoré's tone didn't rise, but the room quieted again. "Through your stock markets, your investor portfolios." He stepped closer to the table, standing over the yellow folder. Then, without ceremony, he opened it. Inside documents. Some faded, some recent. Land deeds, minefield maps, death certificates, photographs of children beside sinkholes. And at the very top, one fresh bold stamp across a signed page. Revocation. Black ink, sharp font, sealed with the Republic's crest. Mouths opened, words failed. "This is illegal," someone blurted out. "This will kill investor confidence." Traoré looked up, gaze firm. "No," he said. "What killed confidence is you believing Africa was still for sale." The room shifted, a ripple of panic disguised as indignation. The French delegate stepped in, trying diplomacy. "Surely we can discuss terms. Perhaps a renegotiation?" "There will be no negotiation on stolen breath," Traoré said. "Every coin you took under false contracts ends today. The people who signed them did not own the land. The ones who suffered were never asked." A younger CEO, red-faced, tried to keep his voice calm. "You don't understand global markets. This will isolate you." Traoré finally smiled, small, tired, but sharp. "No," he said, "it will reveal you." A pause. "You talk about economy, but ours was buried beneath yours for a century. You call it risk when we reclaim it." He reached for the folder, held it up like a declaration. "This isn't revenge. It's correction." Outside, thunder cracked, real or imagined, no one could tell. A storm had been hovering over Ouagadougou all morning, but now, as if in sync with something deeper, the skies began to rumble. Some ministers stepped back. Others stood taller. Something had shifted, not just a speech, not just a contract, but a continent that had spent too long silent, now finding its voice. Traoré turned to leave, his final words echoing behind him. "We are no longer waiting for permission." Then, as if choreographed by time itself, the first drop of rain struck the hotel's glass dome above, and in that moment, the world inside the Horizon Continental Hotel no longer felt untouchable. It felt watched. It felt accountable. And for the first time, some began to realize Traoré wasn't here to make a deal. He was here to end one. The folder was still on the table. The room, once filled with confident voices and clinking glasses, had quieted into an unnatural stillness. A single drop of rain traced its way down the glass dome above, following gravity the way truth always does, slowly but inevitably, and then fade to black. A beat of silence. Then a voice. This is how it all began. Not with bullets, not with riots, but with a folder. The screen flickers. Newspapers snap open. Headlines roll like thunder across the world's screens, flashing in succession. Burkina Faso revokes billion-dollar mining deals overnight. President Traoré defies Western giants. Africa is no longer for sale. Investors panic after shock resource nationalization in West Africa. The yellow folder that shook global markets. News anchors speak over each other. Panels debate. Some call it courageous, others reckless. A few whisper the word dangerous. But none can deny it, the echo of that moment in the Horizon Continental Hotel is now bouncing across boardrooms, embassies, war rooms. And still the voice continues, not the voice of the media, but the same steady one from before. It speaks softly like someone remembering a storm from years ago. It didn't start in a hotel, it started in a garden. Cut. The chaos of the modern world dissolves, replaced by birdsong. Now we see it a quiet village in southeastern Burkina Faso, a dirt path winding between small sun-baked homes. Children's laughter echoes from a distant mango tree. Smoke curls gently from cooking fires. There is peace here, fragile, humble peace. And at the edge of this village, kneeling between rows of vegetables, is the woman, Adisa. She is younger here. Her hands, though weathered, still move with strength as they tend to the soil. Around her the land is lush, not rich in wealth, but in life. Her eyes scan the leaves, alert to pests, careful with the roots. She hums softly a lullaby, half sung, half prayed. A boy runs up behind her, maybe 10 years old, barefoot and bright-eyed. Mama Papa says, "Come see what he found." Adisa wipes her hands on her skirt. She rises, brushing soil from her knees. The boy grabs her hand, pulling her toward the tree line. He says it's shiny like magic. She smiles, but only slightly. She's heard this kind of excitement before. In villages like theirs, magic often meant trouble. They reach a small clearing. There, kneeling in the dirt, is her husband crouched over something glittering beneath a patch of disturbed earth. It is black and jagged, catching the sun just so. "It's not gold," he says. "It's something else." She frowns. "Cover it." He hesitates. "But what if cover it?" Now. And as he pulls dry leaves and soil back over the stone, we see her face one last time, worried not of what they found, but of what might find them. The voice returns softer, now almost a whisper. Before the contracts, before the soldiers, before the red beret, there was only this, a woman, a garden, and a secret buried beneath the roots. The morning sun had not yet burned the dew from the cassava leaves. The soil, warm and dark, crumbled gently between small fingers as Adisa knelt beside the row of crops, surrounded by a half-circle of barefoot children. Their voices rose and fell like birdsong, soft, curious, alive. "Like this," she said gently, guiding a boy's hand to place the stalk at the right angle. "If the root sleeps crooked, the whole plant grows angry." The children laughed wide-eyed. "Plants get angry?" one girl asked. Adisa gave her a knowing smile. "Not loud like people, but they remember. They bend the wrong way or they refuse to feed you. They carry the memory in silence." The children nodded as if she'd just shared an ancient spell. She always spoke like that, like every sentence came wrapped in a story, every pause a prayer. In this village, Adisa was many things: teacher, herbalist, memory keeper. Some said she had lived 2 lives. Others whispered she had survived something the land itself couldn't forget. But today in the garden, she was simply a woman among green things. The children resumed planting. Adisa stood to stretch her back, her eyes drifting toward the road that cut across the edge of the village, dusty, narrow, rarely visited. And then she saw it. A motorbike. Fast. Purposeful. Not the kind used by farmers. This one was newer red paint, still unchipped engine, louder than it should be for such a peaceful morning. It kicked up a wake of red dust as it neared. The children noticed too. A few stood up. One gripped Adisa's hand. The bike skidded to a stop just beyond the fence. A man dismounted. Not a soldier. Not a stranger either. She recognized him, a courier from the city, the kind who delivered money transfers or legal summons. He held something in his hand. A small envelope sealed with dark wax. He looked uncertain, hesitant to step forward. "Are you Adisa Kawande?" he asked. She nodded once. "This is for you. From Jacarija." Time stopped. The name passed through the air like the echo of a ghost. She did not reach for the envelope right away. Her fingers twitched slightly, but her face remained unreadable, like a stone left in the sun too long. The man lowered his voice. "He told me, if anything happened to him, if he disappeared, you'd know what to do." He placed the envelope in her hands. Then he nodded respectfully, remounted the bike, and rode away. No signature. No questions. Just silence. Adisa stared at the envelope. The seal was cracked slightly from heat. Her brother's name was written in familiar, hurried strokes, but something about the ink looked older, like it had waited too long to be read. She turned it over once, twice. Behind her, one of the boys tugged at her sleeve. "What is it, Mama Adisa?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked slowly toward the old wooden bench beside the garden shed. She sat down, eyes still on the envelope. Her fingers moved, but not to open it. Not yet. Memory slid in. Jacarija, the loud one, the brave one. Her younger brother, who never feared soldiers, who spoke too loudly in public squares, who said the mines were poison, who said the government would listen if only people stopped being afraid. Who vanished a year ago after one too many truths. Some said he fled. Others said he was buried beneath the very land he tried to protect. She had never believed he ran. With a steady breath, Adisa broke the seal. Inside was a single page. Her eyes scanned it. Her hands trembled. Coordinates, maps, a list of names, a ledger. A final line handwritten slanted in his furious, loving scrawl. "If they come for me, then the folder must live. Give it to the right hands. Don't let them bury this." Adisa closed her eyes. The cassava garden was quiet behind her, but inside her the ground had shifted. He had always been too honest for the job. Jacarija Kwande was 32 when he became one of the youngest mining inspectors in the southeastern region. Fresh out of university in Ouagadougou, he returned home with crisp collars, wide dreams, and the quiet fire of a man who believed the system could be repaired from the inside. Adisa had warned him. "You're walking into a house already on fire," she told him one night. But Jacarija only smiled. "Then I'll carry water." For a time, it looked like he might succeed. His reports were punctual, his language professional, his inspections thorough. He refused bribes, which made local officials uncomfortable. He submitted formal complaints when safety codes were ignored, which made his supervisors nervous. He asked too many questions about missing shipments. He filed reports about ghost workers, thousands paid, none ever seen. But it was his visit to Site Case 17, a remote gold mine operated by Horizon Mineral Group, that changed everything. Adisa read the documents now spread across her table in the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. The map was hand-drawn, annotated in red ink. Smuggler trails wound through hills that were officially uninhabited. Satellite printouts were attached showing storage facilities that didn't exist on government maps. Offshore account numbers scribbled on scraps of paper. Dozens of shell corporations, all linked to foreign consultants. Every number bled meaning, and then the names. Ministers, generals, CEOs, diplomats. Some were expected. Others weren't. Her brother hadn't just uncovered corruption. He'd built a case for theft on an unimaginable scale. Billions, not millions. And not in the open, but siphoned through layers of legal camouflage and quiet assassinations of anyone who looked too closely. She found a smaller envelope tucked between the maps. Inside, photographs. Children in torn clothes standing outside mine entrances. Thin men sleeping on gravel beside drills. An aerial image, miles of land stripped bare, rivers turned gray with chemical runoff. One picture showed something worse, a man slumped behind a latrine, a bullet hole in his neck, a government ID still hanging from his belt. On the back of the photo, Jacarija had written, "He warned me to stop asking questions. Now he's quiet." Adisa pressed her hand to her chest. So this was why he vanished. Not because he was careless, but because he got too close to the truth and trusted the wrong ears. Her fingers found the last page folded crisply, a single sheet that felt heavier than all the rest. "Sister, if you're reading this, I'm likely gone. I'm sorry. I didn't know how deep it went until I was too far in. This isn't about gold. Not really, it's about the cost of silence. They buy silence with roads, bribes, and sometimes bullets. But you taught me better. You taught me to listen to the land it always remembers. Everything I've found is here. They can erase me, but not this. You must protect it. There's only one man who can use it now. Find him. Give this to the man in the red beret. Tell him I believed in the storm." Jacarija, Adisa's hand trembled slightly as she refolded the page. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the cassava leaves like whispers through a crowd. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then fell silent. She sat back, the folder in her lap, her eyes fixed not on the words but on the memory of her brother's voice, strong, fast, full of defiance. She remembered how he used to talk about change like it was a real physical thing, like you could hold it, plant it, protect it. Now it was in her hands. The garden, once a place of quiet things, had become something else, a battlefield before the war. And somewhere beyond the hills, there was a man in a red beret who had to see this. Inside the high walls of the presidential compound, the air was still. Too still. The ceiling fans spun lazily above the carved wooden table in the war room, a modest chamber compared to foreign standards. But in Burkina Faso, it was the heart of something quietly revolutionary. There were no marble busts, no silk curtains, no European artwork here. Just maps, radios, sealed folders, and three people who had placed their careers, their reputations, and perhaps their lives in the hands of one man. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the head of the table, not in a suit or military dress, but in his signature red beret and olive green fatigues. His fingers rested on the thick yellow folder in front of him, the one delivered just hours ago by an old woman with dust on her dress and fire in her eyes. He hadn't opened it yet. Not completely. He waited until all three had arrived. Captain Malik Sanu entered first, tall, sharp-jawed, still carrying the desert on his boots. He had once trained with foreign special forces, but walked away when he realized they weren't interested in protecting his country, only pacifying it. He greeted Traoré with a silent nod, his eyes already narrowing on the folder. Next came Judge Mariam Kawama, robes fluttering as she walked with a calm that came not from peace but from decades of surviving chaos. She had once sent a minister to prison, a decision that nearly cost her career. But now she sat across from Traoré, watching him the way one watches a fuse just before it lights. Last was Idris Zongo, economic advisor, once a consultant for the very same European companies the folder now implicated. He was the only one visibly sweating. He had grown up in the city, educated abroad, but returned disillusioned. "They hire us to sell our own blood back to them," he once said. But even he wasn't prepared for what this might expose. Traoré finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, but heavy. "This folder," he said, "was given to me by a woman whose brother died for what's inside. His name was Jacarija Kouande, mining inspector." Mariam leaned forward. "I know the name," she said. "Disappeared. Officially resigned. Unofficially silenced." Traoré opened the folder. One by one, he laid out the documents. The offshore accounts, the hidden maps, the photos, and finally the list of names. Malik's jaw tightened as he read. "Half of these men sit at our negotiation tables." Idris said nothing. His fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the table's edge. He recognized too many of the corporate logos, the same ones he once praised in investment pitches. Now they looked like symbols of betrayal. Traoré looked to each of them in turn. "I need you to understand what this means," he said. "If we act on this, we won't be renegotiating contracts. We'll be revoking them. Publicly, legally, permanently." Mariam exhaled sharply. "The international courts will call it economic sabotage." Malik added, "Foreign troops may call it destabilization. You know what they've done in other countries." Traoré nodded. "Yes, but what do you call it? When your people starve while your soil feeds the world's billionaires." Silence. He let the question hang. Idris finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "This will crash the markets, our credit ratings, aid deals. Even the UN may back the corporations, not us." Traoré stepped closer to the table. "They already have. They always will. Unless we show them we're not afraid to fall. Because falling isn't failing, if you land on your feet." He placed the last page on the table, Jacarija's final note. "Give this to the man in the red beret." For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Mariam nodded once. "Then let history show we were warned." And we listened. Malik cracked his knuckles. "Tell me what you need." Idris looked down, then up. "If we do this, I want to be the one to explain it to the IMF." Traoré smiled, grim and resolute. "Good. Then let's begin." Outside, the sky cracked with distant thunder. Inside, the storm had already started. They didn't use tanks. They used paper. That was the first thing Judge Mariam Kawama said when she flipped open the red leather contract pulled from Jacarija's folder. Her voice was quiet, but the venom was unmistakable. Everyone in the room froze. Traoré sat at the far end of the long table. The documents were spread like a mosaic of betrayal, each page a slice of the country's stolen wealth. "Look at this," Mariam continued, tapping a corner of the contract. "This is a colonial-era legal clause. Exclusive extraction rights granted in perpetuity, Ibrahim. They didn't even bother to modernize the language. She turned the page, stamped and approved by a tribunal that no longer exists. A French rubber stamp court from 1963, they're still using it to validate contracts in 2023. Idris Zongo leaned in. It gets worse. He lifted a separate folder, Jacarija's financial tracing diagrams. They built over 200 companies just for Burkina Faso's gold. Most are registered in Luxembourg, Switzerland, Panama, and of course, the British Virgin Islands. Shell companies, paper owners, each one invoicing the next at just below the global standard to legally reduce taxable export value. He pointed to a document. This one here, AfriSurge Holdings Limited. It bought 400 tons of gold last year on paper at a declared rate of $90 per ounce. You know what the global market price was? $1.1950. Malik Sanu swore under his breath. Idris continued, his voice tightening. Less than 1% of our mineral value has been declared for years. The other 99% disappears offshore, Mariam added. And every time we challenge a contract, they send investors with smiles. If we refuse, the embassies get involved. If we push harder, the IMF shows up, asking why we're scaring the market. She slammed a document shut. This isn't theft, it's war by ink. Traoré remained silent for a long moment. His eyes didn't move from the map, a hand-drawn one by Jacarija, that showed smuggling routes across the borders. One arrow pointed directly into a U.S.-contracted logistics hub. Another curved around into Côte d'Ivoire, then straight to shipping docks with diplomatic clearance. He finally spoke. And we let them. The room went still. We let them, he repeated, because we needed loans, because we were told we weren't developed enough, because a man in a suit with perfect grammar offered us $10 million and smiled like a savior. He looked around the table. And for $10 million, we gave away $1 billion. Mariam folded her hands. Not all of us gave it away. Traoré nodded. No, but now all of us pay for it. Every child in a village school without books, every mother walking 5 kilometers for clean water, every soldier underpaid while guarding a mine we don't own. Malik broke the silence. So what do? Traoré looked at him, then at the others. We expose it. All of it. Mariam raised an eyebrow. Even the names, especially the names. Idris frowned. If we do, that banks will freeze our accounts. Corporations will withdraw. The World Bank will suspend support. The markets will punish us. We've already been punished, Traoré said quietly. We just didn't notice because the cuts came slow. He stood and picked up the folder. It looked heavier now, almost sacred. No more. He turned to Malik. I want a full forensic audit of every contract signed in the last 30 years. Start with the mining sector, then oil, then land. To Mariam, prepare emergency legal orders for asset seizures. We'll nationalize everything proven fraudulent. To Idris, leak the offshore routes, anonymously. Let the media dogs sniff it out. Don't give them a single story, give them 50, simultaneously. He paused. And then, prepare the speech, Mariam asked the international one. No, Traoré said, his eyes burning. The national one. The people deserve to hear it first. He tapped the folder. This isn't just proof of theft. It's proof of survival. We've survived this long with only crumbs. Imagine what happens when we take the whole bread back. Outside, the clouds gathered again. Inside, the war room fell into determined silence. It was no longer about what they had found. It was about what they were about to do with it. The air inside the war room had shifted. It was no longer charged with shock, but with clarity. A sober, steady rage. A hunger for restoration, not revenge. No burning flags. No reckless speeches. Traoré said, his voice calm, but resolute. We move fast, but lawfully. He placed both hands on the folder and looked around the table. We don't need to become them to beat them. Mariam nodded. Then we need to divide this into operations. She stood and began writing on the whiteboard behind her, breaking the plan into 3 bold words: justice, evidence, pressure. To start with justice, she said, we build a legal case that goes beyond Burkina Faso. We go to the African Union and the ECOWAS Court of Justice. We demand a full review of exploitative contracts, particularly those signed under duress or post-coup regimes. She paused. And we name names, CEOs, shell company directors, even local officials who took kickbacks. Malik leaned forward. What about the evidence dump? If we leak everything, we won't control the story. That's why we coordinate, Idris replied. I'll work with our contacts in investigative journalism, the Pan-African papers, Le Monde Afrique, even Reuters. Give them the data gradually but timed with each legal action. Miriam nodded. Good. We make every lawsuit front-page news. Traoré turned to Malik. Your part is the most sensitive. Malik already knew. Border smuggling. He pulled out a tactical map. There are 6 illegal gold routes, 5 by land, 1 by air. All operate at night under diplomatic cargo protection. I can't shut them all down without sparking retaliation. You don't need to shut them down, Traoré said. Just monitor. Quietly. I want a list of trucks, drivers, plate numbers, coordinates, and photos. Malik's eyes gleamed. You're going to show the world better, Traoré replied. I'm going to show our people first. Let them see what's been leaving their land and who's been helping it leave. Idris tapped his laptop. I'll calculate the total damages, not just in minerals, but in GDP, lost employment, unpaid taxes. We'll show the African Union and the world what 50 billion looks like in schools, roads, and hospitals. Miriam added, and we time the legal filings right before international investment summits. Make them answer questions on live panels. A quiet pause settled again. For the first time, the plan didn't just feel bold. It felt possible. Make no mistake, Miriam said. They'll try to hit back. Credit downgrades, frozen reserves, sanctions. Let them, Traoré said. He stood and looked toward the window. The sun was rising over Ouagadougou, casting gold light across the rooftops. For too long, we've lived in the shadows of their banks and their rules. But this time, he said, turning back to his team, we shine the light on them. He placed one final line on the table. From this day forward, Burkina Faso is not for sale. The Ministry of Mines slept like a dragon, guarding stolen gold. To the world, it was a faded cream building, tucked between 2 banks on Boulevard Charles de Gaulle. To Captain Malik Sanu, it was the rot at the heart of the Republic, a vault of lies dressed in official seals. It was 2:47 a.m. when he slipped past the side gate in civilian clothes, carrying only a flashlight and a government ID that no longer matched his current title. The night guard bribed 2 days prior pretended to be asleep. A flicker of the eyes was the only signal exchanged. Malik moved quickly. He'd studied the floor plans. He knew where the archives were, basement level, second door after the old elevator shaft. The motion sensors in that hallway had been disabled during an air conditioning upgrade the week before, courtesy of a technician loyal to the cause. What he needed wasn't in the public records room. It was behind a locked steel door marked Service Intern. Classement dérogatoire. Special classification. He pulled out a small toolkit and began working the electronic lock. It clicked open after 40 seconds. Inside, a chill hit him, not from air conditioning, but from the hum of machines. A dozen metal cabinets stood under dim yellow light. Next to them, 2 dusty computers connected to no visible network. He started with the ledgers. They were paper, of course they were. Nothing digital, nothing traceable. Thick books with hand-stamped signatures and ink smudges. He flipped through March, April, May, every month the same pattern. The official record, 1.2 tons of gold extracted and exported. But tucked behind it, a mirror ledger, same months, different numbers. 2.8 tons. He stopped flipping. His hands clenched slightly. More than half the country's gold had never been declared. Not to the tax office, not to customs, not even to the president's office. He scanned deeper. Each missing ton was marked as transferred to an entity called Jasper Consulting Limited, supposedly based in Luxembourg. But there was no invoice, no recipient, no customs paperwork, just initials CH and MB. He scribbled them down, then moved to the cabinet labeled Contrats Anciens. His flashlight caught something unusual, a stack of folders, bound with string covered in colonial stamps. Inside, contracts dating back to 1972 still active. Some bore French government seals. Others had been quietly extended not by Parliament, but by executive memo. Most paid less than 0.3% royalty on extracted value. One company, Terracore Resources, had a declared office in Ouagadougou. Malik raised an eyebrow. He knew that address. He'd passed it often. It was a barbershop. Closed 5 years ago. He flipped to the board of directors. The chairman had died in 1998. Another had been declared missing in 2003. The rest ghosts invented identities, recycled signatures. This wasn't just corruption. This was a machine, a laundering factory of names, stamps, and shadows. He downloaded scanned copies onto a flash drive and took photos of the ledgers with a discreet body cam. As he closed the last drawer, something else caught his eye. A sealed envelope marked Intervention Exterior. Foreign intervention. He opened it. Inside, a memo from an EU advisor dated only 6 months earlier. Any attempt to nationalize or review these contracts will trigger immediate downgrades, withdrawal of development loans, and cessation of diplomatic protections. The companies have security assurances. Push too far, and the situation may become unstable. There it was, the real price of truth. Not just danger, but isolation. Malik exhaled. He looked once more at the room, the cold archive of buried futures stolen under signatures. He walked out, locking the door behind him. As he stepped into the night air, the stars above Ouagadougou seemed sharper, clearer. He didn't smile, but his eyes burned. Because now they had proof, not just of theft, but of threat. And Traoré would know exactly what to do with it. The compound was marked on no map. Its coordinates had been scribbled in the margins of a folded ledger Malik found tucked behind false financial records, a place labeled in French as Centre d'appui humanitaire, Zone Sud, a humanitarian shelter. At least that's what the paperwork claimed. But when Malik arrived accompanied by 2 plainclothes agents, what he found was no shelter. It was a forgotten mining encampment, 2 rusting containers, a water tank, a makeshift kitchen, and a blocky cement structure with no windows. A single flagpole stood limp in the wind. The faded banner on it read, "Solidarity without borders." The irony made his stomach turn. The front gate was padlocked, but one of the agents found a side entrance through the fencing. The air inside was heavy with heat and mildew. Malik stepped in cautiously, flashlight in hand. Dust motes danced in the stale air like ghosts. In the first room, rows of cots lined the walls. Some were broken. Many still had threadbare blankets, folded with mechanical precision. He walked further in toward a locked storeroom. What he saw when they pried the door open froze him in place. There were no mining tools, no food rations, no medical supplies, just rows of tiny shoes, some as small as the palm of his hand. Scattered among them, torn notebooks filled with childlike scrawls, drawings of trees, sun-stick figures holding hands. But there was something wrong. In nearly every drawing, one figure was crossed out, erased violently. He knelt beside a pile of broken toys, plastic trucks, dolls with missing limbs, a soccer ball flattened and patched too many times to bounce. Everything smelled of abandonment, the kind that wasn't accidental. Malik's throat tightened. He opened one of the notebooks. On the last page was a single word written in shaky block letters. Aide-moi. Help me. In the next room, they found records. Not many, just a stack of intake forms labeled temporary relocation for orphans affected by mining zone displacement. Ages ranged from 4 to 11. Some names had no surnames. Most were stamped with approval from a company called Gold Sky Logistics. He'd seen that name before. One of the logistical facilitators listed under offshore payments in the smuggling documents. A humanitarian logistics company that never filed with the National NGO Registry. The final room was worse. It looked like a clinic, but there were no medicines. Only restraints on 2 rusted beds, buckets stained with dried blood, and a cabinet full of syringes unlabeled, unsealed. Some were still half filled with unknown liquid. This wasn't aid, Malik muttered. This was a holding cell. His agent nodded, face pale. Outside in the dry grass behind the building, they found a dozen shallow mounds. A few had wooden markers, no names, just numbers. One had a teddy bear lying atop it, soaked from recent rains. Jakarija's words echoed in Malik's mind. They're not just digging for gold. They're digging graves. He realized now his friend hadn't been speaking in metaphor. Malik took photos, every corner, every shoe, every mark on the wall. Later forensic teams would confirm it, traces of sedatives, signs of trafficking routes leading to border zones, and dozens of children marked as relocated, none ever registered in orphan databases. Some had disappeared entirely. Burkina Faso's gold wasn't the only thing stolen. This was the true shame. That in the shadow of corporate wealth, under flags of humanitarianism and progress, The most vulnerable had been hidden, used, and discarded, and the world looked away because the gold kept flowing. Malik returned to the capital without speaking a word during the ride. That night he stood silently in front of Traoré, and Adisa placed the children's shoes on the table and said only one sentence. "We're not just fighting for our land anymore. We're fighting for their names and for the ones who never got one." The room fell quiet. No one moved, but in that silence something hardened in all of them. This was no longer about revoking contracts. This was war for memory, for dignity, for the children buried beneath gold. The air was heavy with expectation as the press gathered inside the modest state media hall in Ouagadougou. There were no velvet curtains, no golden podiums, only a wooden lectern bearing the national seal. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. President Ibrahim Traoré walked in without an entourage. No generals flanked him, no teleprompter glowed before him, just a folder in his hand, the same one that had ignited a fire behind closed doors. He paused for a moment, scanning the room, then looked directly into the camera. "We are not anti-West," he said quietly. His voice was calm, deliberate. "We are anti-theft." A murmur rippled through the crowd of journalists. Outside televisions across the nation flickered with his face. In dusty cafes and roadside stalls, families leaned closer. School children paused. Soldiers stopped cleaning their rifles. Taxi drivers killed their engines. "Burkina Faso is not a beggar nation," he continued. "We are rich not only in minerals but in spirit. For decades we were told we were poor. But today we have proof we were not poor. We were robbed." He opened the folder and began laying out the contents one by one. He didn't shout. He didn't dramatize. He simply read the names of companies, the amounts laundered, the offshore accounts, the smuggled ore, the missing children, and then he stopped reading. His hand gripped the lectern. "I have seen the graves," he said. "I have seen the toys." For the first time his voice cracked. "My people, our children, were traded like ore." A long silence followed. No flashbulbs went off. No one interrupted. Then he said, "The silence ends today." Across Burkina Faso, something shifted. The air seemed to hum with long-held anger, finally given words. In a small village outside Bobo Dioulasso, an elder leaned forward and whispered to her granddaughter, "You see, we weren't crazy. We always knew." In the northern provinces, where many had watched sons disappear into illegal mines, whispers became declarations. "We were never poor. We were plundered." Old men who once worked as porters near foreign-run refineries clenched their fists with a new memory, the truckloads of gold they'd watched roll past under armed guard while they went home with empty pockets. In marketplaces, farmers lifted their heads a little higher. In classrooms, teachers rewrote the morning lesson plan. A fire had been lit, not one of rage, but of reckoning. International news outlets scrambled for statements. Western embassies issued guarded remarks. Investors whispered the dreaded word instability. But on the streets of Burkina Faso, another word took shape in the mouths of the people. Dignité. Dignity. The next day, hundreds of villagers walked for hours to the capital, not in protest, but in support. Some carried signs, "Burkina is not for sale." Others brought old mining tools, relics from their fathers laid symbolically at the gates of the presidential compound. Traoré stood at the window as the crowd gathered, not cheering, but simply standing silent, solid, unwavering. He turned to Idris Zongo and said only this, "Now they believe. Now we cannot turn back." And far beyond Burkina Faso, in boardrooms and government offices, panic set in. Not because of a coup or weapons or war, but because for the first time in generations, a people had broken the silence. And they had done it with truth. The ballroom of the Global Mining Energy Summit in Geneva sparkled with opulence. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in warm light. Rows of seats were filled with executives in designer suits, political envoys, oil magnates, and hedge fund managers. The stage itself was framed with banners boasting this year's theme, Sustainable Growth Through Global Partnership. The keynote speaker, a silver-haired CEO from one of Europe's largest resource conglomerates, was wrapping up with a practiced smile. And so we see that stable long-term contracts in regions like West Africa are key to prosperity for everyone involved. Polite applause followed. He adjusted his tie and was about to step off the stage when a ripple moved through the crowd. Security turned their heads. Murmurs spread. A man was walking calmly down the central aisle, No badge, no invitation, just presence. President Ibrahim Traoré, dressed not in a suit but in his red beret and plain officer's fatigues, he moved like someone who knew he belonged where others wished he didn't. No need to call security, he said, stepping onto the stage. I'll only need 5 minutes. That's less time than it took you to sign away 30 years of our minerals. The room went dead silent. Traoré turned to the audience. His voice didn't rise. It cut. In 2003, your company signed what you called a development contract with our former government. In exchange for exclusive mining rights across nearly 1/3 of our land, you promised infrastructure, education, and a fair share of profits. He pulled a worn document from his pocket, holding it up for the cameras. But here's what the fine print actually said. A screen behind him came alive. Paragraph after paragraph of legalese filled the screen until the key clause was highlighted in red. Burkina Faso grants perpetual extraction rights to the consortium in exchange for a fixed 2% royalty, non-renegotiable, irrespective of market fluctuations. Gasps echoed. Some of the CEOs visibly shifted in their seats. A few whispered to aides. Others looked away entirely. Traoré turned back to them. You paid 2%, he said, while gold prices soared, while cobalt became the new oil, while lithium made your companies trillions. He let the silence hang, then delivered the line like a dagger. This was not a partnership. This was theft in fine print. The moderator, a nervous Swiss diplomat, approached. Mr. President, we weren't expecting. You weren't expecting truth, Traoré said sharply. But here it is. Every document we found, every offshore account, traced every forgery exposed. We're bringing them all to the African Union, to The Hague, and to the court of public opinion. A camera zoomed in on his face. He stared directly into it. Burkina Faso is not your colony, not your mine, not your silent partner. We are the owners, and the silence is over. He left the stage as calmly as he had entered. The room burst into noise, not applause, chaos. Journalists scrambled for statements. CEOs barked into phones. Investors furiously typed emails. The summit, so carefully choreographed, had been hijacked by raw, undeniable truth. Hours later, news outlets around the world ran headlines like African leader crashes summit, exposes billion-dollar scam. Burkina Faso declares economic war on exploitation. Traoré names names, the new face of resource rebellion. But back in Burkina Faso, in a quiet village lit only by cooking fires, Adisa watched the speech on a cracked phone screen surrounded by children. She smiled. That's the man your uncle believed in. One child asked, Are they going to be angry? She nodded. Yes, very. Another whispered, Will they come with soldiers? No, Adisa said, her voice soft but firm. Not this time. This time they'll come with contracts, with smiles, with fear. She looked out into the night toward a world that was finally listening. The fallout began before Traoré's boots even touched the tarmac back in Ouagadougou. Inside boardrooms in London, New York, Geneva, and Paris, panic spread like fire through glass towers. CEOs who had once smiled over scotch and cigars now gripped their phones with white knuckles. Freeze the joint ventures. Shut down Burkina operations until further notice. Sell the West African portfolio. Quietly, call the legal team. Now. Within 24 hours, $11 billion in investments were pulled from West African mining indexes. Commodity markets trembled. Gold prices surged. Stockholders demanded explanations. Some companies issued cold corporate statements. We are committed to fair practices and will review all historical agreements. But the public had already made up its mind. Headlines screamed across major outlets. The African reckoning has begun. The Guardian. 50 Bowers stolen, Traoré drops the hammer, Al Jazeera. Colonial contracts under fire, the New York Times. Who really owns Africa's gold, Le Monde. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Traoré Truth Gold Heist and Africa Was Not For Sale trended for days. TikTok videos broke down the contracts clause by clause. Reddit threads traced shell companies to retired politicians. A 17-year-old YouTuber from Nairobi gained 3 million views in one night explaining how the West robbed Africa with a pen. But the true earthquake came quietly in hushed corridors of global power. Banks in Luxembourg began freezing accounts flagged in Traoré's document dump. Swiss lawyers ducked press calls. British MPs demanded an inquiry into colonial-era trade practices. And behind the scenes, Interpol moved. At Geneva International Airport, a tall man in an expensive coat and a scarf, Luc Morrow, CEO of Astor Continental, moved quickly through VIP security. His assistant carried only a single laptop and a burner phone. His private jet waited on the tarmac, engines already humming. But as he approached the final gate, two plainclothes officers stepped forward. "Monsieur Morrow," one said, flashing a badge. "There's been a change in your flight plan." Luke froze. "Excuse me." The officer didn't repeat himself. Instead, he turned slightly, revealing another presence, a middle-aged cleaning woman pushing a mop standing just a few meters away. She looked Morrow in the eye with a calm that pierced him. She whispered one word, barely audible over the hum of the terminal: "Shame." He didn't answer. He couldn't. The mop bucket rolled away and the moment passed. But the echo of that word followed him through customs, through questioning, through the slow unraveling of the empire he had built on sand. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré met with his cabinet. There was no celebration, no champagne, no declarations of victory. Just a map on the wall, a stack of dossiers, and an understanding. "This isn't over," Traoré said quietly. "They won't fight with guns. They'll fight with influence, with banks, with media. But they are no longer the only ones who know the game." His advisors nodded. Outside crowds gathered not in protest but in pride. Children wore red paper berets. Vendors sold T-shirts reading, "We were never poor. We were robbed." The world had seen Traoré speak truth to power. Now it was watching to see if that truth could stand the storms to come. The international freeze came hard and fast. Western banks halted transactions. Aid agencies suspended projects pending review. Commodity partners pulled out overnight. In the cities, shelves emptied quicker than they could be restocked. At border crossings, trucks were turned away. Even mobile money apps failed to process payments. And yet Burkina Faso did not collapse. It did something else. It stood up. In the heart of Ouagadougou, volunteers converted a government courtyard into a food redistribution center. Trucks rolled in from local farms. Rice, millet, and cassava were bagged and labeled. Elderly men and young girls alike formed human chains, passing goods hand to hand. A young man, formerly a ride-hailing app driver, used his motorcycle to deliver sacks to neighborhoods in need. No pay, just pride. In dusty rural schools, teachers stood before classrooms lit only by sunlight through tin roofs. One teacher, a woman named Selena, drew a chalk line on the blackboard and wrote above it, "Before Stone Day, after Stone Day." Her students blinked. "Stone Day 1 asked." Selena smiled, but there was weight in her tone. The day President Traoré placed that folder down, he threw a stone into a quiet lake. It rippled through bank cities, even other continents. That stone was truth. A boy raised his hand. "But now they're punishing us." "No," she replied gently. "They're revealing themselves." That's different. By the second week, people were calling it La Journée de la Pierre, Stone Day. Not a holiday. A turning point. The day the poor stopped apologizing for their poverty and started asking, "Where did our wealth go?" On street corners, poets recited verses about stolen cobalt and unborn futures. Radio hosts debated the morality of loans disguised as support. At mosques and churches, spiritual leaders reminded their followers, "The land has not abandoned us. It is still beneath our feet." In the markets, bartering returned. Soap traded for maize. A mechanic fixed bikes in exchange for tomatoes. A seamstress stitched school uniforms in return for honey. It wasn't easy, but it was theirs. And through it all, the land remained quiet but powerful. Green fields swayed in the Sahel winds. Children sang songs in Moray about red berets and folders and gold that would never again leave quietly in someone else's pocket. In one village, an elder carved a small stone with the word dignity. He placed it beneath an old baobab tree and said to his grandson, "This stone will not feed you, but it will remind you that you are not for sale." International media outlets tried to spin the story collapse looms in Burkina Faso, isolation or insurrection, but every drone photo of a food line showed smiling faces. Every satellite shot of a quiet border hid the growing hum of local production. No violence, no looting, no riots, just a people choosing to endure with their heads high. In a late-night radio address, Traoré said just 12 words, "If they wanted us to fall, they forgot to check our roots." And in homes across the country, families nodded in silence. because they understood something the world had forgotten. You can freeze money, but you can't freeze courage. The night was unusually still. Even the crickets seemed to hush as a low, distant hum broke across the horizon. One by one, villagers emerged from their homes, drawn by the unmistakable vibration in the earth. Children climbed onto rooftops, elders lit lanterns without saying a word. Somewhere beyond the hills of Ouagadougou, the sky began to glow, not with fire, not with war, but with return. 12 military cargo planes, matte gray and marked with the flag of Burkina Faso, descended through the clouds like silent shadows. There was no press conference, no parades, no televised announcements. This was not theater. This was history being rewritten in the language of silence. On the hilltops just outside the capital, thousands of villagers stood shoulder to shoulder, their clothes simple, their eyes wide, not with fear but awe. Mothers held their children close. Men removed their hats in reverence. No one dared to speak as if words might break the spell. From the belly of the first aircraft, the golden crates appeared, stacked neatly locked in steel, each one marked with seals from foreign banks and old colonial crests. 48 crates per plane, each crate nearly a ton. The gold was real, tangible, heavy, home. Soldiers in uniform formed a respectful line, their expressions a mix of disbelief and duty. No one touched the crates with greed. There was only gravity, emotional and literal. On a quiet hill overlooking the landing site stood Adisa, wrapped in her faded scarf, her hands clasped over her chest. The same hands that once taught cassava to grow, that once clutched a yellow folder and dared to walk into a palace of predators, now trembled not from age but from recognition. It was the gold her brother died for. The gold her people had been told was gone, buried, non-existent. And now it returned in steel wings and midnight silence. A boy no older than 6 tugged gently at the edge of her shawl. His eyes reflected the moonlight and the metal below. "Grandmother," he whispered, "is that really ours?" Adisa looked down at him, then at the hilltops full of silent witnesses, then at the gold. Her answer came with no hesitation. It always was. Down at the landing zone, Traoré stood watching. He wore no medals, no parade uniform, just his simple fatigues and the unmistakable red beret. His arms were folded across his chest, but his gaze was unflinching, as if daring the night itself to forget what it had witnessed. Beside him stood Judge Mariam Kawama, Captain Malik Sanu, and Idris Zongo, each one having played a part in recovering what had been lost for generations. Malik exhaled slowly. 12 aircraft, he muttered. $50 billion. And yet this feels heavier than that. Traoré nodded once. Because it's not just gold, it's proof. Judge Kawama's voice was quiet. Proof that we were never crazy, that we were never poor. Traoré turned toward her. And that we're not victims anymore. In the villages, the murmurs began to swell. Not like gossip, but like a hymn. Old men recited stories of ancestors who once mined these lands with bare hands, never knowing their worth. Women whispered names of loved ones buried beneath shafts of stolen profit. Teachers would wake the next morning and add new chapters to history lessons, chapters that began with silence and ended with return. By sunrise, the gold would be secured in the national treasury under the protection of a new constitutional clause. No resource may leave Burkina Faso without majority ownership and transparent accounting. But for now, there were no laws being read, no signatures needed. There was only the sound of crates being unloaded, the wind rustling through millet fields, and a boy holding tightly onto his grandmother's hand, looking up at the sky that once swallowed everything and now returned something greater than gold. Dignity. In the village of Saponaire, just 3 days after the planes brought the gold home, something extraordinary unfolded, not in parliament, not in a courtroom, but in a dusty schoolyard beneath a neem tree. It began as a game. Children freshly dismissed from morning lessons gathered in a circle. One had drawn lines in the dirt to mark a courtroom. Another brought a broken wooden chair to serve as the judge's bench. They wore cardboard hats, some marked CEO, others lawyer, and one little girl with a pink scarf stood tall as Madam Prosecutor. Behind them, a handful of elders sat watching with amused curiosity. But as the minutes passed, their smiles faded into reverence. The children were not just playing. They were remembering and rewriting. Order in the court, the judge, a boy, no older than 8, shouted, slamming a stick on the ground. The People vs. Gold Thieves is now in session. The prosecutor, with fire in her voice and dust on her cheeks, pointed toward a line of 3 boys slouching on the other side of the circle. These men said we were poor, but they took our minerals, our land, and even our schools. They built tall buildings in their countries while we learned under trees. Gasps and laughter erupted from the crowd of watching children and villagers. But the prosecutor didn't smile. She lifted a crumpled sheet of paper and declared, "I have evidence, fake company names, secret papers, and offshore accounts." One of the boys, pretending to be a CEO, stood up and sneered, mimicking a Western accent. "You villagers don't even have shoes. What do you know about contracts?" The prosecutor didn't flinch. "We know enough to count," she said, "and what you took was everything." The audience was silent now. No more laughter. The sky had dimmed slightly and dust floated lazily in the heat. That's when Adisa stepped forward. She had been watching from under the shade, her scarf loosely tied, her cane planted in the earth. The children parted for her, instinctively sensing this was no longer play. She took the judge's seat without needing to ask. "I was there when my brother died for truth," she began. "And I was there when your fathers had no seeds to plant because the trucks took our land." She looked each of the pretend CEOs in the eye. Her voice remained low, but it trembled like distant thunder. "They used our math to count what they stole, our minds to dig, our bodies to lift, our silence to multiply their profit. But now we count ourselves." The villagers leaned in. Even the birds in the trees seemed to quiet. "We count our names," she continued. "We count our dead. We count our children. We count our worth." She stood slowly, lifting her cane with both hands. "And today," she said, "we count our verdict." The children stood as one. The judge nodded gravely. "We, the people of Sapanay, find the accused guilty." Another child shouted, "What's the sentence?" Adisa smiled, not bitterly, not angrily, but with the calm of someone who had waited a lifetime for this moment. "There is no revenge here," she said, "only memory. And from memory we rise." She turned to face the villagers gathered around. "We do not wait for someone else to declare us worthy. We declare ourselves innocent." And rising. Tears fell silently down one woman's cheek. A man clasped his hands in front of him, head bowed as if in prayer. In the center of the circle, the children began to clap, not in applause but in rhythm, a steady, solemn rhythm. One by one, the villagers joined in, stomping feet, clapping hands, sending up a dust that shimmered in the evening light like gold itself. And though there were no cameras, no foreign dignitaries, no official seals or speeches, it was perhaps the most honest trial ever held on this land. Because this one was for the people, by the people, and above all, about the people. Justice didn't come in the form of arrests or lawyers. It came through memory, unity, and the unbreakable voice of those who had been told to stay silent, and now they never would again. It was only a folder, yellowed by time, creased at the edges, and sealed no longer by tape, but by memory. Inside the newly built National Memory Pavilion, where sunlight filtered through high wooden beams and wind danced across open courtyards, the folder sat quietly inside a glass case at the center of the main hall. No fanfare, no guards, just one spotlight and a small bronze plaque beneath it. One teacher, one letter, one nation reborn. Children filed in with their teachers, barefoot, curious, wide-eyed. They weren't told to be silent, yet none spoke above a whisper. There was something sacred in the air, though no religion defined it. Perhaps it was because the folder didn't just contain secrets, but something far rarer, truth. And truth in a land that had long been buried beneath lies now glowed like gold in the glass. That morning, President Ibrahim Traoré arrived alone, dressed not in military uniform, but in the traditional white bubu of the Mossi people. No entourage followed, no camera crews. Just him, his breath, and the memory of everything that had led here. He walked slowly down the central aisle past murals hand-painted by village artists. One showed a mining cart tipped over its contents, spilling out children's shoes, school books, broken shovels. Another showed Adisa standing beneath the neem tree cane in hand fire in her eyes. And at the very end, the largest painting of all, a faceless crowd lifting a folded piece of paper into the sky like a flag. He paused before the glass. There it was, the folder, The same one Adisa had carried through guards and arrogance, through heat and disbelief. The same one her brother had died for. The same one that had shattered decades of quiet theft. He stared at it for a long while, not as a leader, but as a man. A man who, just like her, had been told what he couldn't do, couldn't question, couldn't resist, couldn't win. And yet here it was. Proof that resistance didn't always come from tanks or speeches, but sometimes from a garden teacher with calloused hands and a brother's faith. A small hand reached up beside him. A boy of about 8, his shirt patched and dusty, was pressing his fingertips gently against the glass. He didn't say a word, but he looked up at Traoré with a question unspoken. Traoré met his gaze, then turned back to the folder. "No," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We were never small." The boy smiled and nodded. More children gathered. Some copied the words on the plaque into notebooks. Others simply stared, trying to imagine a time when their future had been stolen, because now it had been returned. Outside the pavilion, a bell rang. It wasn't for alarm or mourning. It was the new morning bell rung daily to remind everyone what the folder had begun. A return not just of gold, but of dignity, and unlike gold, it would never be stolen again. The room was silent, not with the silence of hesitation, but the reverent, breath-holding quiet of history being made. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall of Ouagadougou, light poured through stained glass windows, depicting farmers, miners, teachers and children, everyday citizens who had long stood invisible under the shadow of foreign powers. Now they were reflected in the very walls of their democracy. At the head of the chamber, President Ibrahim Traoré stood beneath the national seal. He held a single sheet of paper in his hand. It bore only one new sentence, yet that sentence had taken decades, even centuries, to write. He read it aloud. Article 27A. All resources beneath our soil belong solely and irrevocably to the people of Burkina Faso. Their benefits shall never be for sale, lease, or compromise without direct informed consent from the citizens who live upon that land. He paused, letting the words settle into the room. No applause followed. No one stood to cheer or chant. Instead, a quiet wave moved through the chamber, hands placed over hearts, heads bowed, tears shed silently. Even the opposition leaders, once skeptical, did not speak. There was nothing left to debate. This wasn't a victory for a party, it was a return. Traoré signed the amendment with a steady hand. The pen he used had once belonged to his grandfather, a farmer who had never seen a ballot box. He passed the document to Judge Mariam Kawama, who placed the official seal beside his name. Outside, the crowd didn't roar. It simply watched the live broadcast from screens hung on buildings and radios held close to chests. Elders murmured blessings. Teenagers stared in awe. And somewhere in a village not far from Saponet, a little boy asked his mother why people cried when they were happy. She smiled and said, "Because it means they finally feel seen." Days later, in the heart of the village of Saponet, a single slab of red granite was placed in the central square. It wasn't flashy. It had no gold inlay, no elaborate design, just 7 words carved deep into its surface. "We are the soil, and the soil remembers." The stone had been brought by hand, not by trucks or cranes, carried piece by piece from the mountains where Traoré's ancestors were buried. Every village along the way had added something to it: a chip of native ore, a poem, a palm print in clay, a child's drawing etched into the side. It had become more than a monument. It was a message rooted in permanence. School children gathered in a semicircle around it. In matching uniforms, they opened small books, freshly printed copies of the new Constitution, handed out freely to every student in the country. One by one, they read passages aloud. "No contract may violate the dignity of the land. All education shall include the history of what was taken and what was reclaimed. A citizen is not defined by wealth, but by responsibility. Power must return to the hands that grow, the cassava teach the letters, and draw water from the well." Adisa stood behind them watching. She wore a simple white scarf and held a staff carved by her late brother, Jacarija. She didn't speak, not once. When the final line of the Constitution was read aloud, she stepped forward and placed her palm gently on the stone. A moment passed, then another. Finally, she turned away, not because it was over, but because it was beginning. Behind her, the children continued to read, and the soil, long silent, listened. The ripple effect began almost immediately. At the African Union's emergency session held just weeks after Traoré's public disclosure of the smuggling networks and fraudulent contracts, a motion was raised. Simple in language, radical in consequence. We propose an independent continent-wide audit of all mineral and land contracts signed with foreign entities from 1960 to present. For a moment, no one moved. Then came a voice from Namibia, then Ghana, then Tanzania. One by one, nations that had once been told their pasts were inconvenient began to realize something deeper. They were not alone. The vote passed, and what followed wasn't chaos, it was clarity. Countries began publishing old records, uncovering decades of silent theft dressed in legal language. Documents long buried in storage rooms and locked cabinets were now front-page news. Former CEOs were summoned. Tax havens were exposed. And in villages thousands of kilometers from Burkina Faso, farmers told their children watch them. They made the world listen. In South Africa, a retired teacher reopened her old curriculum to include the Traoré case study. In Kenya, a group of school children created a mock tribunal for colonial-era corporations, broadcast live on TikTok. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, elders asked for the first time in years that their village's name be inscribed again on government maps. And back in Burkina Faso, a new classroom was being built near the Memory Pavilion. Inside, a young teacher, barely 23, stood in front of her first group of students. They were restless. The sun was hot, but she had their attention. She picked up a chalk and wrote a word on the board, dignity. Then she turned to them and asked, "What does this mean to you?" A small girl raised her hand and said, "It means no one else decides who we are." The teacher smiled, and the class began. Not with textbooks, not with lectures, but with the echo of a yellow folder, a garden, and a people who remembered the worth of their own soil. This story isn't just about gold or politics, it's about dignity. It reminds us that justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it walks in quietly through the hands of teachers, farmers, and children. Traoré didn't win with bullets, he won with truth, unity, and courage. And Adisa, an ordinary woman with a folder, reminded the world that silence isn't weakness. It's waiting for the right moment to speak. There is power in remembering, power in reclaiming what was taken, not just wealth, but voice, identity, and hope. In a time where exploitation often hides behind polished contracts and polite diplomacy, this story asks us to look deeper. What do we truly owe each other as people sharing the same earth? And maybe the bigger question is, what would you do if your soil remembered and asked you to stand up for it? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.